work with me to get this bill to this point in the reauthorization process. Neither of us can say this is a perfect document. It's a starting point in the legislative process that is just the beginning. I'm pleased that it's going through the committee process. Not a lot of bills do that these days, and I've had appreciate the opportunity to work with you to take this first step. And I don't think there's any bill that's tougher to do than an education bill, and that's largely because almost everybody's gone to school. And that makes them experts from their point of view. They all have something that they know from their education that they hope doesn't happen to their kids, or they hope does happen to their kids. And we want to incorporate as many good things as possible and eliminate as many bad things as possible. But again, it's a real wide array of opinions that are out there based on everybody's past education and the education of their kids. Well over a year ago, we came together to try to address broad categories of concerns and, to some extent, problems that needed fixing with the No Child Left Behind. We did this after a series of hearings, listening to our constituents and colleagues, and in my case, working with Senator Alexander to identify what we should keep and what needed to be changed through reauthorization. We've worked since then to address the areas that needed changing, obviously bringing our own interpretations on how best to accomplish that, but ultimately finding what I hope is middle ground to move this reauthorization document forward. Three big things that this does: it reduces the federal footprint, it continues a system of transparency to parents regarding student performance, and it eliminates many duplicative and wasteful programs. In reducing the federal footprint, it removes 95% of the schools from federal accountability. It removes requirements to calculate adequate yearly process, that's AYP, and assess progress towards annual measurable objectives, AMOs. It leaves to the states and local school districts to determine college and career-ready standards, to determine the lowest performing schools, to determine teacher evaluation systems, to determine achievement gap schools, and to determine turnaround strategies. It allows states to utilize growth in their accountability systems. And continuing the system of transparency to parents regarding student performance, it maintains the disaggregated reports on subgroups and annual assessments. It designs federal, state, and local report cards with meaningful information on how students in the schools are doing. It includes reporting on teacher credentials so that parents are aware of teacher qualifications. It strengthens parent and family participation in the development of state and local plans and school turnaround strategies. In the category of eliminating many duplicative and wasteful programs, it eliminates 40 programs. It streamlines additional programs into 4 consolidated, flexible spending authorities and allows states to transfer funds as they see fit to meet the needs of their schools and their students. Now, on the central issue of accountability, standards assessment, teachers and principals, parental involvement, and the role of the federal government, we've fought hard to reach this agreement, though neither of us would say it's perfect or that we like it in its entirety. From where I sit, far more could have been done to allow states and locals to take the lead in the 9 areas Senator Alexander and I identified as issues needing fixing. I also acknowledge, Mr. Chairman, that you would have gone further in the opposite direction to reach these goals. But with nearly every successful piece of bipartisan legislation, we need to find those areas with which we agree and go forward trying to find solutions where resolution is not as obvious. Finding bipartisan solutions is essential to passing legislation. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which first passed in 1965, has been passed in a bipartisan way every time that it's passed since that time. On substance, there is no doubt a rewrite of No Child Left Behind is necessary. Over the past decade, I've heard countless times that No Child Left Behind's rigid federal accountability system handcuffs states. It micromanages how school administrators and teachers approach instruction, and it leaves very little room for innovation and creative approaches in the classroom. Although the fundamental tenet of No Child Left Behind, a good education for every student, was a good one that's retained in this proposal, the approach in reaching that goal was built upon the flawed belief that Washington can solve every problem in education if we only pass one more law, one more regulation, one more program, and throw more taxpayer dollars at our classrooms. On the contrary, I believe we can approach this issue by giving states and school districts the resources needed to support instruction and providing transparency of results to parents so they know whether their child's receiving a quality education. One thing that is not in the bill that I would have liked but would not want to force the states to do, but would hope the states would do and think it would make one of the big advances in education, is if parents could tell from the tests that their kids take where they are in the education process. You know, if they're in 5th grade and the kid's reading at a 3rd grade level, they ought to be able to see that easily. But there isn't anything that guarantees that, and for most states it's hidden under standard deviations and other technical terms. Now, this bill rejects the notion that states and schools cannot be trusted to ensure that every child receives the education they need, and that Washington has to continually interfere so that their students can succeed. This draft improves upon No Child Left Behind's robust reporting and parental involvement and requires the Secretary of Education to report annually on how schools are performing nationally. It maintains disaggregated reporting on subgroups and annual assessments. I think that's one of the biggest changes that No Child Left Behind did when it was instituted. Now, I want to be clear, however, that only one test is required under this proposal, which is the same as it is under No Child Left Behind. Now, unfortunately, that's an end-of-the-year test, and one of the things that I've heard from teachers is that the information of that test doesn't follow the student, so the teacher the next year doesn't have the information on what the weaknesses were of that student until they get to the end of the year, and then it's somebody else's problem. In addition, parents will know about teacher qualifications and receive report cards on how their children are doing in school. Furthermore, it says to the parents that the federal government will assist in providing the most up-to-date and relevant data relating to your child's education. Senator Alexander has long supported the idea of a Secretary's report card submitted by the Secretary of Education, which provides a snapshot of the nation's progress in education. This snapshot would allow parents in Wyoming to compare how their children are doing to children across the country. And I applaud Senator Alexander for putting forward this idea, which in my opinion is one of the key components of how this legislation helps parents understand whether their child is achieving in school to be college and career ready. The bill eliminates dozens of programs that no longer serve a purpose or are duplicative of other programs, even in agencies other than the Department of Education. We've also streamlined many additional programs into consolidated, flexible spending. The proposal also increases the flexibility states and school districts have to transfer funds across programs to give are being used to address identified student needs. Importantly, the bill tells our nation's worst performing schools, this is your last chance. Currently, schools that have failed to do their job, that are the lowest performing schools in a state, continue to receive federal funding. This proposal gives these schools a final chance to turn things around by using specific models that have produced results. The bill does away with adequate yearly progress and annual measurable objectives, and instead expects all students to be making progress toward achieving college and career readiness. And within that, there's flexibility for the states. For the remaining schools, the legislation noticeably rejects the Washington knows best approach contained under current law. It reduces the federal footprint for those schools, recognizing that states, when given the chance to innovate, will actually do the right thing and educate their students in the best way that they can. It further recognizes the promising work of the Council of Chief State School Officers and the Common Core Standards Initiative, dissemination of best practices relating to teachers and curriculum, and innovative approaches to charter schools. But it does each of these, and this is most importantly in my view, not as a top-down mandate, but providing room for states to operate. In particular, with respect to standards, this bill allows states to develop their standards against what they consider necessary for students to be college and career ready. On process, in light of President Obama's, in my view, political announcement of waivers for states, it's even more important that Congress act now. Legislating is undoubtedly the right of Congress, not the bureaucracy of the Department of Education. I agree that the President has the authority to waive requirements of the law at the request of states. However, I don't believe this authority extends to substituting or adding requirements that are not in current law in order for states to receive these waivers. We've gone far beyond the time frame allotted to change No Child Left Behind, but waivers are not the way to correct the law based on what we've learned over the past 10 years. What we're doing today through the legislative process is correcting the law. Members on my side should keep in mind that if they're concerned about issues such as mandated teacher and principal evaluation and performance measures, they should support today's draft legislation, which does neither but is contained as a requirement in the President's conditional waivers. If they're concerned about an unelected, unaccountable bureaucracy becoming a kind of national school board, they should support this legislation rather than allow the Secretary's waiver to dictate the strings that come with state and local flexibility contained in the President's waivers. And finally, if they're concerned about the sea of redundant and duplicative programs still authorized under the current law, they should support this legislation, which eliminates or consolidates 40 programs, but which is not contained in the President's conditional waivers. This bill doesn't solve everything. It's not meant to be the whole answer. It is to correct what we have learned is problematic with No Child Left Behind and build on those things that helped us to move closer to making sure that each child receives the best education possible. This bill does not preclude consideration of other education bills, and I would welcome some of those ideas coming before this committee, particularly as separate bills, rather than trying to get through committee on the coattails of this bill. This is not a comprehensive bill. It's not a perfect bill. It's my hope that we can follow one of the successful precedents of this committee by staying with amendments that are relative to the issue, in some cases offering and withdrawing amendments that would be poison pills, and in other cases offering and withdrawing amendments that with some adjustment and additional work could be agreed on by both sides and still get the problem the author wants to address. I have noticed that some of the amendments do come from both sides and are slightly different, and sometimes those can be worked out. The Help Committee on Education Bills has always been able to find a way to get a bipartisan bill done. As I mentioned, since 1965, every education bill has reached the President's desk for signature with strong bipartisan support. And this should not be the year that that changes. So please be considerate of what you propose. Help us to get this bill to the floor where changes again can be made, and then to conference with the House, where undoubtedly more work will need to be done. With that said, I look forward to this markup and to hearing the ideas of the members on both sides of the aisle. Again, I believe this is a first step in reauthorizing ESEA and should be viewed as an opportunity to improve this bill. And I thank you all for your work, particularly you, Mr. Chairman, and your staff, and look forward to furthering those efforts with our work today.
Thank you very much, Senator Enzi, and I, too, want to thank you for a close working relationship and also all of your staff. This has been